In front of millions, Elon Musk looked the world in the eye and said faith in God is essential. A man of science, suddenly speaking of the soul. Why did the world's greatest innovator turn to something he couldn't prove, and what secret struggle led him there? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The lights in the studio shimmered under polished glass panels. A low hum of anticipation buzzed through the seated crowd, everyone leaning forward slightly, eyes locked on the stage. The set was sleek, modern, and professional. Just what you'd expect for a conversation with Elon Musk. The backdrop behind the host's chair displayed rotating images of rockets, space stations, and gleaming electric vehicles. The audience expected to hear about Mars, Tesla, AI, or the future of transportation. Then Elon Musk stepped out. Wearing a simple black blazer and a quiet confidence, he walked across the stage and shook hands with the interviewer. Cameras clicked rapidly. Flashbulbs blinked. A few people in the front row applauded softly. Elon nodded once and took his seat. The interviewer, smiling, welcomed him and launched into the introduction, briefly summarizing Elon's latest achievements and upcoming missions. The mood was light, familiar, safe. But then something shifted. Elon glanced around the room, then leaned forward slightly, his expression unusually still. The interviewer opened his mouth to ask about spaceflight, but paused when he saw Elon's face. The billionaire entrepreneur took a quiet breath and spoke first. "I'd like to talk about something else," he said. The room fell silent. Not about Mars. Not about AI. Something much deeper. Something no one expected. The audience didn't see it coming. With the cameras still rolling and the world watching, Elon Musk leaned slightly toward the microphone. His voice was calm, his tone steady, but the words he spoke hit like a wave. "I believe faith in God is essential for every person." For a moment, the entire studio froze. The interviewer blinked, clearly caught off guard. Reporters sitting in the front row stopped mid-sentence, their pens hovering in the air. Producers behind the cameras exchanged glances, unsure if they'd heard him right. This was Elon Musk, engineer, futurist, man of logic, not a preacher, not a philosopher, and certainly not someone known for religious declarations. Yet there he sat, his posture relaxed but his words undeniably deliberate. He wasn't quoting a book. He wasn't pandering to a crowd. This wasn't marketing or strategy. It was personal. Elon didn't flinch. He didn't rush to justify or explain. He let the silence speak alongside him, as if to say, "This matters more than anything I've built." In that instant, something shifted. This wasn't a conversation about data or development. It was about belief. About what carries us when everything else falls apart. The questions were coming, but Elon had already said the one thing that couldn't be unsaid. Elon Musk sat quietly for a moment, his expression shifting from bold to reflective. Then he spoke. Softly, but with weight. "There was a time," he began, "when I didn't know if I could keep going." He didn't need to explain what time. Everyone familiar with his story knew the years when SpaceX teetered on the edge of collapse. When 3 rockets in a row failed to launch successfully. When investors pulled back. When employees began to question his vision. When the media called him reckless and arrogant. But what most people didn't know was what those failures did to him personally. "I had given everything," Elon continued. "My time, my money, my energy, and still, it wasn't enough. I would go home at night and sit alone, wondering if I was wrong, wondering if I had wasted everything." The audience leaned in closer. This wasn't the Elon they were used to seeing. This was a man stripped of armor, telling the truth about pain. "I trusted logic. I trusted hard work. I thought if I worked harder than anyone else, things would always move forward. But there came a moment where logic couldn't help me, where reason failed. He paused. That's when something else stirred inside me. A whisper. A quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, there was more to all of this. He looked directly at the interviewer, voice steady. I had faith. Not just in my team, not just in the science, but in something greater. Something I couldn't explain, and that faith gave me strength when nothing else could. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but those words, spoken gently and without pretense, settled over the room like a blanket. For the first time, many realized that Elon Musk's drive wasn't just powered by invention. It was carried by faith. The interviewer leaned forward, brows furrowed. But Elon, you're a man of science. You've built your life on data, innovation, logic. How can you say faith is essential? Elon nodded slightly, as if he had been expecting the question. It's a fair challenge, he said calmly. Science is about asking how. Faith is about asking why. The words hung in the air, weightier than expected. I've spent much of my life breaking problems down, he continued. Designing rockets, engineering electric cars, optimizing artificial intelligence. All of that requires deep technical understanding. But the more I solved those puzzles, the more I found myself staring into a different kind of mystery. One that can't be quantified. He shifted slightly in his chair, folding his hands in his lap. I remember one night, he said, being outside, looking up at the stars. It was just after a launch. I should have felt triumphant, but instead, I felt small. Not in a bad way, in a humbling way. The interviewer watched him carefully. So you think feeling small led you to faith? No, Elon replied. Feeling small made me realize I wasn't the center of everything. Science taught me how galaxies form. Faith made me wonder why they're beautiful. That night, I didn't just feel small. I felt guided. The audience was silent. I've come to believe, Elon said, that knowledge and wisdom aren't the same thing. Science gives us knowledge, tools, explanations, advancements. But wisdom comes from understanding what matters, not just how things work. He leaned forward slightly, speaking more deliberately now. Faith doesn't replace science. It complements it. It fills in the human part of the equation, the part that asks, what's the point? Why are we here? Who are we, really, when everything we've built is stripped away? The interviewer crossed his arms, intrigued but still skeptical. But some would argue that faith is for people who are afraid of the unknown, that it's a crutch. Elon didn't flinch. I think faith is for people willing to face the unknown with open hearts. It takes more courage to believe in something you can't control than in something you can. He paused. I don't believe in blind faith. That's not what I'm saying. But I do believe in the idea that not everything can or should be explained by formulas. Some things need to be felt, trusted, lived. The interviewer looked down for a moment, then back up. So, you're saying that science and faith aren't enemies? They can't be, Elon answered. Because they're asking different questions. Science asks, what is this? How does it work? Faith asks, why does it matter? What does it mean? He let the words breathe before continuing. When I talk about space, I talk about orbits, propulsion, fuel. But when I talk about why we go to space, that's not science, that's faith. Faith that there's more out there. Faith that humanity can become something more. The interviewer's tone softened slightly. Do you think that belief is what keeps you going? It's what gives it all meaning, Elon said simply. Without that belief, all this, rockets, satellites, energy systems, it's just machinery. It's just movement without direction. He looked around the room for a moment. The most advanced machine we can build still can't answer the question of purpose. Only the soul can do that. The interviewer sat back, processing everything he'd just heard. Elon had reframed the discussion. This wasn't science versus faith. It was about two parallel paths, both seeking truth. One through what we can test, the other through what we feel, what we trust, what we hold sacred, even when it defies explanation. And in Elon's eyes, the two had never been more aligned. The studio lights dimmed just slightly, softening the mood. Elon paused, as if weighing whether to continue down the road he was about to take. Then, with a breath that sounded more like a memory than a word, he began. "There was a time," he said, "when I wasn't sure I would make it. When I thought everything I'd built, everything I had believed in, was about to collapse." The audience leaned forward. "It was early in SpaceX's history," he explained. "We had just had our third failed launch. 3 failures, millions of dollars lost. The media had written us off. Investors were pulling back. Internally, morale was crushed. People were starting to believe the critics. And to be honest, so was I." His voice had softened. The confidence that usually carried him through high-stakes interviews was now laced with something deeper: vulnerability. "I remember sitting alone after that third failure," he continued. "I didn't want to talk to anyone. I didn't even want to think. I just sat there, completely empty, like I had given everything and it still wasn't enough." The interviewer said nothing. The moment needed space. "That night," Elon said slowly, "something happened. I can't explain it. I was surrounded by silence. I had no plan, no answers, no clear next step. But in that moment, something stirred inside me. It wasn't logic. It wasn't strategy. It was faith." He looked out toward the audience. "I believed something was carrying me, even when I couldn't prove it, even when every bit of data told me to stop. I felt, somehow, that this wasn't the end, that there was more, that I wasn't alone." For a man who had once built his identity on formulas, physics, and engineering, the words felt almost surreal. "I had always been the one to solve problems," he said, "to break them down, find the weak points, build something better. But this, I couldn't solve it. I couldn't build my way out of it. I just had to believe." He paused again, visibly reflective. "For the first time," he said, "I felt truly powerless. And strangely, that's when I felt something greater than power. I felt purpose. Like this journey wasn't just about launching rockets. It was about becoming someone who could endure failure and still move forward." The interviewer's voice was gentle now. "Did you ever doubt there was anything beyond this life? That there might not be more?" Elon nodded slowly. "Yes, I used to believe that. I thought maybe we're just biology, neurons firing, systems operating, cells dividing. I thought maybe when we die it's just nothing. A shutdown, like a machine that runs out of power." He looked down for a moment, searching his own words. "But that night," he continued, "as I sat there in complete silence, I realized that emptiness is not peace. It's just noise without sound. What I felt wasn't logic. It was something else. A whisper, maybe. A presence. I didn't see anything. I didn't hear a voice, but I felt like something or someone was telling me to keep going." His voice cracked, just slightly, but it carried the weight of authenticity. "I couldn't explain it, and honestly, I didn't try to. I just decided to trust it." The interviewer didn't interrupt. "I've learned since then," Elon said, "that faith doesn't mean certainty. It doesn't mean having all the answers. It means taking the next step when you don't. It means trusting that the road leads somewhere, even if you can't see around the bend." He let that sentence sit for a moment before finishing. "Faith is what helped me push forward when logic gave me every reason to stop. Faith gave me strength when numbers gave me fear. And that," he said, "was the beginning of everything else." There was no applause, no cheers, just silence. A deep, reverent silence that filled the studio with something more powerful than excitement: connection. And in that silence, Elon Musk, man of science, builder of machines, architect of the future, had become something else entirely. A man of faith. The lights in the studio now felt warmer, softer. It was no longer a stage, it was a space where something real was happening. Elon Musk leaned forward, not to make a point, but to let something out that had lived in silence far too long. "You know," he began, "for a long time I didn't talk about this stuff. Not publicly, not really even privately. I thought faith was something vague, something you relied on when you didn't have facts. But I've come to see it differently." The interviewer sat back, no longer guiding the conversation, just witnessing it. "In the past," Elon continued, "I measured everything. Success, failure, trajectory. Data ruled every decision I made. It was how I stayed grounded, how I controlled outcomes, how I avoided chaos." He paused, not for dramatic effect, but to gather himself. "But life isn't always measurable, especially the moments that matter most." The audience was still, watching him not as a CEO or innovator, but as a man. "These days," he said, "faith shows up in small ways for me. It's not always about God and a church or some grand theological explanation. It's about waking up on the hard days and believing they won't last forever. It's about trusting that failure isn't final, that pain has meaning, even when you can't see it." He looked down at his hands, his voice steady but low. "I've learned that faith doesn't have to mean you're sure. It just means you keep going when you're not." The interviewer nodded slowly, visibly moved. "That's not how people expect you to talk," he said quietly. "Not someone like you." Elon offered a half smile. "That's the thing. People think because I run companies and build technology, I'm invincible. But I'm not. I have doubts, I have fears. I've had nights I couldn't sleep, days I couldn't breathe under the pressure." He turned toward the audience, not preaching, but sharing. "What keeps me moving isn't the next invention or the next headline. It's a quiet belief that this, all of this, has meaning, even the parts I don't understand." The interviewer asked softly, "So what does faith mean to you now?" Elon took a moment before answering. "Faith," he said, "is believing that there's purpose in the unknown. It's knowing that even if I can't see the whole picture, there's a reason to keep trying, to keep building, to keep loving. It's not about having answers, it's about being willing to face the questions." The studio fell into silence again, this time not from surprise but from resonance. Everyone in the room had been there, in the silence, in the doubt, in the struggle to hold on when everything inside them wanted to let go. "I used to think faith was for people who needed comfort," Elon said. "But now I know it's for people who choose courage, who get up when nothing makes sense, who believe, without evidence, that the story isn't over." The interviewer didn't speak. He didn't need to. The audience didn't stir. They didn't blink. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was something else. A revelation unfolding in real time. Elon looked across the room, his voice quieter now. "I don't have all the answers, but I'm okay with that, because I believe there's something greater at work. Maybe it's God, maybe it's the universe. Maybe it's something we haven't even begun to understand. But I feel it, and that feeling, that hope, it's what gives me strength." He sat back in his chair, not triumphant, but open, honest, unafraid. And for the first time, perhaps, the world wasn't just hearing Elon Musk. They were feeling him. Elon Musk sat a little straighter now, not with pride, but with purpose. The moment had shifted again. This wasn't just a conversation, it was a window into something deeper. "I think there's a misunderstanding about what faith really is," he began calmly. "Some people hear the word and immediately think it means blind optimism, just hoping things get better without doing anything. But real faith isn't passive. It doesn't ignore the facts. It faces them, then chooses to keep going anyway. The interviewer nodded but remained quiet. Elon had more to say. "I've built things," Elon continued. "I've spent my life creating, designing, problem-solving, and I love it. But at some point I realized something. The most powerful force in the universe isn't innovation or technology, it's meaning." The room was still, the truth of that sentence lingering. We're not just here to build, we're here to understand. We're not just engineers or scientists or artists, we're searchers. His voice softened, but it never wavered. Everything I've done, SpaceX, Tesla, Neuralink, it all started with a search, a question. How can we move forward? How can we help people? How can we survive? But somewhere along the way I realized advancement isn't enough. We also need alignment. The interviewer finally leaned forward. "What do you mean by alignment?" Elon smiled gently. "I mean knowing that what we're building matches why we're building it, that the work we do matches the values we hold. If we lose sight of the why, we're just accelerating towards something we don't understand, and that's dangerous." He paused for a breath. "Faith," he said clearly, "grounds us in the why. It gives us the courage to keep moving, but also the wisdom to ask where we're going." There was a silence that followed, one filled with reflection, not uncertainty. "I used to think faith was a kind of weakness," Elon admitted, "like it meant giving up on logic or giving in to emotion. But now I see it differently. Faith is what lets us rise again when everything falls apart. It's the strength to start over, to rebuild, to hope." The audience hung on his every word, their expressions shifting from surprise to recognition, because whether or not they used the word faith, they had all leaned on something when life got heavy. "You don't have to believe in God to understand what I'm talking about," Elon said. "You just have to have lived long enough to lose something, to break, to question everything. That's when faith becomes real. It's not theory, it's survival." The interviewer sat in silence, visibly moved. This wasn't a tech leader preaching dogma. It was a human being reflecting on the deeper current that runs beneath all human achievement. "And that," Elon finished, "is the part we often overlook. We chase success, we celebrate invention, but in the quiet moments, the ones no one sees, it's faith that carries us through. Not because it gives us all the answers, but because it reminds us we're not lost." And in that moment, it wasn't about science or spirituality, it was about something that belonged to everyone. A universal truth spoken from a place of experience, humility, and wisdom. Elon Musk leaned back slightly in his chair, the lights softening around him, the energy in the room shifting from sharp curiosity to quiet introspection. He looked out at the audience, not with the cool confidence of a tech mogul, but with the warmth of someone who had walked through fire and come out changed. "Faith," he said gently, "isn't just about believing in God. It's about believing that life matters, that what we do matters, that even when we don't understand everything, we're still part of something bigger than ourselves." There was no script in front of him now. No statistics, no launch schedules, no code. Just a man speaking from a place of hard-earned truth. "I've been through moments when I felt like giving up," he continued. "I've watched everything I built teeter on the edge of collapse. In those moments, logic couldn't help me. Optimism wasn't enough. What carried me through was faith." He paused, letting the silence speak before the next sentence. "And I don't just mean faith in a higher power. I mean faith in the future, faith in people, faith in the idea that what we do, especially in the hardest times, still has purpose." The interviewer didn't speak. No one in the room did. The moment belonged to Elon, and to every listener quietly reflecting on their own journey. "You don't have to have it all figured out," Elon said, now speaking more directly to the audience. "You don't have to see the whole picture to take the next step. Most of the time, you won't. But you take the step anyway. That's faith. His voice was steady, but behind it was the unmistakable emotion of someone who had truly wrestled with doubt and come out the other side. The future is uncertain. It always will be. But that doesn't mean we stop trying. That doesn't mean we give up when it gets hard. If anything, that's when faith becomes most important. Not because it removes the difficulty, but because it gives it meaning. The camera slowly panned across the audience. Faces once lit with curiosity were now softened with contemplation. There was no applause, no outburst, just stillness, listening, absorbing. Elon looked down for a moment, then back up again, his voice almost a whisper now. I used to think I needed all the answers, that if I just solved every problem, I'd find peace. But I've learned something else. Sometimes peace comes when you stop solving and start trusting. He gave a slight nod, more to himself than to the crowd. And that's what I want for you, he said at last. Not certainty, but courage. Not perfection, but purpose. Not answers, but the strength to keep asking the questions that matter. With those final words, Elon Musk let the silence settle. Not as an end, but as an invitation. A quiet challenge to everyone in the room and to everyone listening from far beyond it. Elon Musk sat quietly for a moment after his final reflection, his eyes scanning the silent room. Then he spoke the last words of the evening, words not spoken with showmanship, but with something deeper. Conviction. Faith, he said softly, is what gets me up in the morning, even when nothing else makes sense. It was a simple sentence, yet it echoed through the space like thunder. There was a pause, then slowly people began to rise, not just in appreciation of the man who had redefined technology, but in recognition of something greater. Truth, spoken from the heart. The applause wasn't loud at first. It was reverent, but it grew, not for celebrity, not for achievement, but for honesty, for courage, for the unexpected grace of one man admitting he didn't have all the answers, and realizing that was okay. As Elon stood and offered a small nod, the audience remained standing. They weren't clapping for rockets or cars. They were clapping for something they had forgotten they needed: hope. If this inspiring story moved you, subscribe for more journeys into hope, purpose, and belief. Stories that remind us we're not alone, and that even in the unknown, we can still believe in something more.